Imagine receiving a letter from your daughter, her handwriting, her words, telling you she's okay, she's moved on, she just needs some space. You'd believe it, wouldn't you? You'd miss her, but you'd believe it. Now imagine finding out years later that letter was never written by her at all, that she was already gone when you read those words, that a man sat down and forged every single word in cold blood just to buy himself more time. That is exactly what happened to the families of 8 women in America. 8 women who trusted the wrong man. 8 women who simply vanished. And the man responsible? He wasn't hiding in the shadows. He wasn't a loner. He wasn't someone people avoided. He was a grandfather, a church volunteer, a family man, a businessman, someone everyone in his town smiled at and waved to every single morning. His name was John Edward Robinson, and he became known as something nobody had ever been called before in the history of American crime: the first internet serial killer. This is his story, and I have to warn you, some parts of what you're about to hear are deeply disturbing. Stay with me, because this case will genuinely shock you from beginning to end.
Dead bodies found on his Lynn County, Kansas farm.
To understand how John Robinson got away with what he did for so long, you first need to understand who he appeared to be. Because the most dangerous predators in history are never the ones who look dangerous. They're the ones who look completely safe. John Edward Robinson was born on December 27, 1943, in Cicero, Illinois. He was one of 5 children raised in a working-class family. From a very young age, people noticed something about John. He was charming, unusually charming for a child. He could talk to anyone. He could make anyone laugh. He had this warmth about him that made people feel comfortable almost immediately. As a teenager, he was an Eagle Scout. He performed at the London Palladium at just 13 years old as part of a choir group, and he actually met Queen Elizabeth during that trip. His family was proud. His community was proud. Everyone looked at young John Robinson and saw a bright future. He got married in 1964 to a woman named Nancy Jo Lynch. They eventually had 4 children together. From the outside, the Robinson family looked like a picture postcard of American life. Nice home, lovely children, devoted husband and father. But underneath that picture postcard, something very different was building. Even in his early adult years, Robinson could not stop lying. It was like a compulsion for him. He fabricated his medical qualifications and worked as a fake doctor for a period. He committed fraud at multiple jobs. He stole money from employers. He forged documents. He was convicted of fraud several times throughout the 1960s and 1970s, but always managed to avoid serious prison time. He was just so convincing. Judges believed him. Employers gave him second chances. People always gave John Robinson another chance because he just seemed so genuinely remorseful every single time. What nobody understood yet was that John Robinson didn't feel remorse. He never had. He was simply very, very good at pretending. By the 1980s, Robinson was in his 40s. He had a long history of fraud and deception behind him, but no one connected all the dots. He lived in the Kansas City area and was respected in his local community. He volunteered. He attended church. He coached youth activities. And then, in the mid-1980s, something shifted. John Robinson's crimes stopped being about money. They started being about something far darker. The year is 1984. Paula Godfrey is a young woman in her early 20s living in the Kansas City area. She's looking for work, trying to build her life, full of hope the way young people are. John Robinson approaches her with an offer. He tells her he runs a company called EquiPlus and that he's looking for young people to train for good-paying jobs. He's charming, professional, well-dressed. He seems completely legitimate. Paula is excited. She tells her family about this wonderful opportunity she's been given. And then Paula Godfrey disappears. Her family is confused and worried. They go to police. They report her missing. And then something strange happens. A letter arrives, written in Paula's handwriting, addressed to her family. The letter says she is fine. She's decided to move on with her life. She doesn't want contact. She appreciates everything, but she just needs her space. Her family is heartbroken, but they believe it. Why wouldn't they? It's her handwriting. It sounds like her. What they don't know, what they can't know, is that Paula never wrote that letter. Paula was already gone. John Robinson had sat down and carefully forged that letter himself. He had studied Paula's handwriting. He had crafted words that sounded believable, and then he had posted it to her family to make sure nobody kept looking. It was calculated, it was cold, and it worked perfectly. 1 year later, in 1985, Robinson found his next victim, and this case was even more disturbing than the first. Lisa Stasi was 19 years old. She was a young mother with a baby daughter named Tiffany, who was just 4 months old. Lisa was in a desperate situation. She was struggling financially, had left an unstable relationship, and was staying at a women's shelter, trying to get back on her feet. Robinson presented himself as a charitable businessman. He told Lisa he ran programs to help young women in difficult situations. He could get her housing, job training, a fresh start. He seemed like an answer to prayer for a young, struggling mother. Lisa trusted him completely. She left the shelter with her baby daughter Tiffany and went with John Robinson. She was never seen again. But here is where this case takes a turn that is almost impossible to believe. Robinson didn't just make Lisa disappear. He took her 4-month-old baby daughter Tiffany and gave her to his own brother, Don Robinson, and Don's wife. He told them the baby was available for private adoption through his connections. Don and his wife had been struggling to have children, and Robinson knew this. They adopted baby Tiffany, renamed her Heather, and raised her as their own daughter. They had no idea where she had really come from. They had no idea what Robinson had done to get that child. And Heather, little Tiffany, grew up in a loving home, completely unaware that her real mother had been murdered by the very man who arranged her adoption. Once again, Robinson forged letters from Lisa to her family. Once again, a grieving family believed their daughter had simply walked away. Once again, nobody kept looking. Robinson had now found a system that worked, and he wasn't going to stop. Through the late 1980s and into the 1990s, John Robinson continued his life of complete deception on 2 parallel tracks. On one track, he was the respectable family man, still married to Nancy, still living in their home in Kansas, still volunteering, still socializing, still the friendly neighbor everyone waved to. His children were growing up. He attended their events, took family holidays, played the role of devoted patriarch completely convincingly. On the other track, he was hunting. More women connected to Robinson disappeared during this period. Catherine Clampett in 1987, Beverly Bonner in 1994, Sheila Faith and her disabled daughter Debbie Faith in 1994. Each time, Robinson had a reason to be connected to these women. A job offer, a business opportunity, a promise of help. And each time, another forged letter, another family told their loved one had simply moved on. What is particularly chilling about Robinson is his patience. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. After each disappearance, he simply went back to his normal life, had dinner with his family, went to church, smiled at his neighbors. But the 1990s brought something new that Robinson immediately recognized as an opportunity: the Internet. In the early 1990s, the Internet was brand new. Most people barely understood it. Chat rooms were just emerging. Online communities were forming around every imaginable interest, and Robinson, already a master manipulator in person, immediately saw what this new technology could do for someone like him. He could be anyone online. He could create any identity. He could reach women far beyond his local area. Women who had no way to verify anything he told them. Women who might never even tell anyone they were talking to a stranger online. He began spending hours in internet chat rooms. He was particularly active in BDSM communities, online spaces for people interested in dominant and submissive relationship dynamics. He called himself Slave Master online. He presented himself as an experienced, trustworthy, dominant partner. He targeted vulnerable women, women who were lonely, women who had perhaps been hurt before and were looking for something real, women who felt they had found a genuine connection with this warm, experienced, understanding man they had met online. He would build trust over weeks and months of online conversation. Then he would suggest meeting. He would offer to fly them out to Kansas. He would promise them a relationship, security, adventure. And they would come. Because online, John Robinson seemed like exactly what they were looking for. What they found when they arrived was something very different.
By the late 1990s, Robinson had been operating for 15 years. 15 years of lies, forgeries, disappearances, and murder. And not once had he faced any serious investigation. But in 1999, he made a series of mistakes that would finally unravel everything. Suzette Troughton was a 27-year-old woman from Michigan. She was intelligent, adventurous, and had been chatting with Robinson online for some time. He had promised her a job caring for his elderly father, good pay, travel opportunities, and a relationship. Suzette was excited. She called her mother almost every single day. They were extremely close. In March 1999, Suzette traveled to Kansas to meet Robinson, and then the daily phone calls stopped. Suzette's mother, Carolyn, was immediately alarmed. Her daughter never went a day without calling. She started pushing. She contacted people. She went to police. And unlike the families of previous victims, Carolyn Troughton absolutely refused to accept that her daughter had simply chosen to disappear. A forged letter arrived as usual, but Carolyn didn't believe it for a second. The letter didn't sound like her daughter. The details were wrong. She kept pushing. Around the same time, police in the Kansas City area had started receiving complaints about a man matching Robinson's description. Women were coming forward saying they had met him online, traveled to meet him, and had disturbing experiences. Some reported theft. Some reported assault. The complaints were piling up.
Detectives began to look more carefully at John Robinson. What they found when they started digging was extraordinary. Robinson had storage units rented under various names. He had properties in Kansas and Missouri. He had a long history of fraud convictions, and women connected to him had a habit of vanishing. In the spring of 2000, police began surveillance on Robinson. They watched him carefully for weeks. They gathered evidence. They built their case methodically. And then, in June 2000, they made their move. Robinson was arrested on charges initially related to theft and sexual assault, based on complaints from women who had survived encounters with him. But detectives knew there was something much bigger here. They obtained warrants to search his properties, and what they found on a rural farm in Lynn County, Kansas, on June 2, 2000, would make headlines around the entire world. I want you to take a moment before I describe this next part, because what investigators discovered on that farm in Kansas in the summer of 2000 is genuinely one of the most disturbing discoveries in American criminal history. On Robinson's rural property, detectives found large sealed barrels, the kind used for industrial storage, heavy, sealed with chemicals. Inside those barrels, the bodies of women. 3 barrels, 3 victims, preserved inside them for years. Investigators then moved to a storage facility Robinson rented in Cass County, Missouri. 2 more barrels, 2 more victims. 5 bodies total discovered in those searches. Combined with earlier evidence, investigators were eventually able to connect Robinson to 8 murders in total. 8 women whose families had received forged letters and spent years believing their daughters and sisters had simply walked away. Among the victims identified was Lisa Stasi, the young mother who had disappeared back in 1985 with her baby daughter. And this is the moment that broke everyone involved in the case, because detectives now had to find the child, baby Tiffany, who had been given away by Robinson 15 years earlier. They traced the adoption back to Robinson's own brother, Don. They found a teenage girl named Heather, who had grown up in a loving family, completely unaware of any of this. Heather Robinson was around 15 years old when investigators knocked on their family's door. She had to be told that her real name was Tiffany Stasi, that her real mother was Lisa Stasi, that the man who had arranged her adoption as a baby had murdered her mother. The investigators who had to deliver that news described it as one of the hardest things they ever had to do in their careers. Don Robinson and his wife were completely devastated. They had genuinely believed the adoption was legitimate. They had raised Heather with love and had no idea of the horror behind her origins. As for Robinson himself, when he was arrested and confronted with the evidence, he showed almost no emotion. The man who had smiled and charmed his way through 15 years of crime simply looked at investigators with calm eyes. He had one more trick he was going to play. He was going to make them prove every single thing in court. The trial of John Edward Robinson began in 2002. And it was one of the most closely watched criminal trials in Kansas history. The prosecution built a meticulous case. They had the physical evidence from the barrels. They had forensic evidence connecting Robinson to the victims. They had records of his online activity, his fake identities, his communications with women. They had the forged letters. They had witnesses who had survived encounters with him. The defense tried to create doubt where they could, but the evidence was overwhelming. Robinson's wife, Nancy, sat through much of the trial. The woman who had been married to this man for decades, the mother of his children, she had to sit in that courtroom and hear in detail what her husband had truly been for all those years, what he had been doing while she cooked dinner and raised their family and trusted him completely. Former neighbors, colleagues, and community members who testified described the complete dissonance of it all. This was a man they had known, a man they had trusted with their children at community events, a man they had asked for advice. The idea that he had been capable of this seemed genuinely impossible to them, but the jury had no doubt. On October 29, 2002, John Edward Robinson was convicted of capital murder. He was sentenced to death. He was also convicted in Missouri on 3 additional murder charges and received 3 life sentences for those. Robinson was taken to El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas, where he sits on death row to this day. He is now in his early 80s, and in all the years since his conviction, he has never once provided a full and genuine account of everything he did. Investigators have long believed there may be additional victims, women who disappeared and whose cases were never connected to Robinson. Women whose families may still be waiting for answers that may never come. John Robinson has never given those answers. He just keeps smiling.
John Edward Robinson fooled everyone for 15 years. He fooled his wife. He fooled his children. He fooled his community. He fooled the families of his victims with forged letters written in their daughters' handwriting. And he used a brand new technology, the internet, in ways nobody had even imagined yet to find even more victims. 8 women lost their lives. A teenage girl found out the most devastating truth imaginable about where she came from. Families spent years grieving women who they thought had simply chosen to leave them, never knowing the real reason those letters had stopped. The case of John Robinson changed the way law enforcement thought about online crime forever. It proved that the internet could be weaponized by predators in ways that were completely new and completely dangerous. The lessons learned from this case directly shaped how police investigate online crimes today. But the thing I keep coming back to, the thing that I think is the most chilling part of this entire story, is not the crimes themselves. It's the normalcy, the absolute everyday normalcy of this man's life running alongside everything he did. He went home after every single one of these crimes. He had dinner. He watched TV. He slept in his bed. He woke up the next morning and smiled at his neighbors. That is what makes John Robinson truly terrifying. Not that he was a monster hiding in the dark, but that he was a grandfather sitting right next to you in the light. If this case shocked you, please leave a comment below with your thoughts. I read every single one. And if you want more true crime stories like this one, please subscribe because I have many more coming. Stay safe out there, and remember, evil rarely looks the way we expect it to.